Hello, dear friends. Today we will look at the memoirs of German Colonel Eberbach. More specifically, we will look at the course of the battles at the beginning of the war with the Soviet Union. I enjoy studying materials and personal memoirs of soldiers about the beginning of Operation Barbarossa in the Soviet Union. It was here that the Blitzkrieg strategy truly met its match. The Red Army was strong, not only in terms of numbers, but also in terms of technology, with a huge number of tanks, aircraft, artillery systems, and much more. The main problem for the Red Army was its inexperienced officers. A huge number of them had been subjected to repression in 1937, even though they were people hardened by the battles of the Civil War. They were replaced by inexperienced young officers whose qualifications did not match their positions. Divisions, corps, and armies were commanded by people who were completely unprepared for this. In addition, Soviet war doctrine assumed only offensive operations and only on foreign territory. The Soviet army was not ready for war, especially defensive warfare on its own soil. Nevertheless, despite all its problems, it remained a formidable opponent, which came as an unpleasant surprise to German soldiers and officers. These memories confirm the severity of the fighting at the beginning of the war with the Soviet Union. Well, let's get started. July 20th, 1941. It was truly a crazy war. We were harassed on the flanks all day long. We couldn't get our tanks through the forests and swamps. The infantry also preferred to bypass the areas where we had already carried out a small mop-up operation. As a result, entire battalions of Russian soldiers remained in the forests, and since the nearest division had moved 10 or even 20 kilometers ahead of us to the north, there were entire enemy divisions in between. There were no German troops on the southern flank all the way to Kiev. In their place was a Russian combined arms army. There was no hope that the Russians would simply stand and watch from the opposite bank of the Soj River as our supply columns marched along the road just a few kilometers away from them, especially since they were hungry. As a result, a crisis arose, but not too great one. One of our repair platoons was badly battered, which was a tragedy for the regiment. The Russians attacked the town of Propoysk with artillery and aircraft, and at noon, they launched a successful attack from two sides and occupied the eastern end of the bridge. North of us, there were Russians everywhere, as were to the south. The bridgehead held by the 33rd Infantry Regiment in Krychev was attacked twice during the night. Of course, everything was horribly exaggerated. At 6 p.m., a radiogram arrived. The bridge in Propoysk is partially blown up, partially occupied by the enemy. The entire division was pulled back. But we couldn't retreat. In that case, we would have had to blow up all our non-combat ready tanks. We prepared for battle. I issued orders to the battalions. Another urgent message from the division. When will the 1st Battalion be ready? Being a cautious man, I said, in an hour. They were being directed, as usual, as quickly as possible, to break through to the 12th Infantry Regiment and, together with it, recapture the bridges at Propoysk. And this was already the second time, only now in the opposite direction. I advised that the 1st Battalion go there immediately and restore order. I suggested continuing to move forward. My suggestion was rejected. Half an hour later, Maynard von Lauschert cheerfully headed for the bridge with 33 tanks. He had to travel 55 kilometers. A couple of hours later, he took the bridge, completely intact and undamaged. Then, together with the infantry, he cleared the area. The question of the entire division retreating was not even raised. I believed that we first needed to advance north to clear the area, and then, joining forces with the Kiev military group, encircle and destroy the Russians south of us. Unfortunately, it took the infantry a long time to catch up with us and take over our tasks. July 21st, 1941. Fighting rages in front of and behind us throughout the day. Our front stretched for 50 kilometers. All the Russians had to do was strike us from both sides, and we would be finished. But we attacked. That is what saved us. But it also led to significant losses. We could not be everywhere at once. Wherever we appeared, the Russians were there, fighting desperately. In addition, they were trying to break out of the encirclement. 120 kilometers behind us, Russian tanks destroyed our repair platoon. In Cherkov alone, 250 people were wounded in the division, and there were many skirmishes along the road. We had to leave the wounded there because we were cut off. July 22, 1941. Yesterday was a difficult day. The regiment's total losses after a month of war in Russia amounted to 54 killed and 87 wounded. That's more than in Poland and France combined. The end of the war is not any closer. On the night of July 20th to 21st, I was awakened by an alarm. The task was to guard a section of the main supply route with the forces of another division's rifle regiment. I asked the commanders of the units assigned to us to show me the destination. Before leaving, I asked the commander of the infantry battalion in the area if the road was safe. Then I got into my staff car, followed by the commander's tank. Several combat vehicles were standing at the meeting point. I sent Ger there to find out what was going on. He returned and said that it was hot there. Accordingly, I climbed into my commander's tank. Next to the wrecked vehicles were abandoned infantry weapons and mortars. Then came a sudden strike. An anti-tank shell hit the commander's tank. I shouted to my driver, Melling, "Step on it! Forward!" The second shell also hit its target. Then I realized that we were being attacked from the front. We reversed into a ditch, then a third hit. After that, we reversed into the forest. Before we reached it, a fourth shell found us. The caterpillars started making strange rattling noises. We turned around very carefully. Another flash. But we weren't hit. Finally, in a state of shock, we found ourselves in a wheat field. The front wheel and caterpillar were damaged. It was impossible to repair them on the spot. We dragged ourselves to another section of the road. The infantrymen wanted to ride on the armor. I got out of the tank and told them we had to go back. While the crew was repairing the tank, I looked for the infantry and artillery commanders. They were asleep. You could say I woke them up. They were completely exhausted and believed they were completely safe there. Then the battalion commander appeared, looking like a ghost, and reported that the Russians had set fire to 2 regimental tanks and broken through his battalion's positions. The remaining fighters retreated to this settlement. I immediately ordered the artillery and all heavy weapons to open fire on the advancing enemy and the retreating infantry to regroup. The Russians, supported by tanks, were thrown back in a swift counterattack. But soon they went on the offensive again. The situation was very complicated. The enemy approached us through the forest within hand grenade range and attacked with a cry of "Hurrah!" Using 10 tanks, I barely managed to hold back the enemy advance, but the situation remained very tense for several hours. I rushed back and forth between the tanks and infantry in the vanguard, the reinforcements and the division headquarters, past damaged tanks, past burning tanks, past 25 infantrymen stabbed to death by Russians in hand-to-hand combat, past a large number of dead Russian soldiers and horses, past one of my dead tankers. Sergeant Weiss from the regimental headquarters was killed in the battle. The front armor plate was torn off Ger's tank. We all looked a little battered. The Russians also attacked constantly in other places. They were not afraid of death and calmly walked over the bodies of their fallen comrades. The officers drove them forward, but they themselves were also very brave. Despite this, we held our ground. Finally, it became quieter. The day before yesterday, we lost 5 tanks. Yesterday, 3. we retreated to 2 strongholds. It sounds simple in words, but not when you have damaged tanks, wounded, dead, and supply trains. Fuel, ammunition, food, especially bread, were running out. That's all for today. If you like the video, please support it with a like and subscribe to the channel. Bye for now. See you next time.